was a time when the Philistines were Israel's greatest enemy. The Philistines lived over here on the coast, and the Israelites lived in the center of the country, and there was the high country in between, and that is where they met for battle. The Israelites stood on the top of a steep hill facing the Philistines with a deep valley down in between them. And for a month solid, they stood on the heights, each on their own side, rattling their swords, shouting insults at one another. Each side knowing that if they were the first army to head down the hill to attack, the other army would then have the advantage of the high ground and would easily overcome them. And so it was a standoff. There they stood, shouting and rattling, until the champion of the Philistines issued a classic mano-a-mano challenge. One soldier from each side would meet in the middle. The two alone would battle, and whichever soldier wins, they win for their entire cause, and the other side becomes their slaves. The Philistines send out Goliath of Gath. Goliath is gargantuan. Some people say he was 9 feet tall, with an ego to match. He had a suit of armor that weighed about as much as a Ford truck. Gargantuan Goliath of Gath bellows across the valley, "Come, fight me!" King Saul himself stood head and shoulder taller than any of his troops. He could have played center on any NBA team. Saul's the natural pick to go and fight Goliath, to battle this brute, but instead of leading his troops in courage, the only thing Saul is leading them in is knee-knocking fear. Israel's entire army, from the king on down, is terrified. Everyone, save one, cute little David. David with such pink, rosy cheeks. His brothers used to tease him, call him Pinky. His ears stick out like Will Smith on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Little David, who spends most of his time practicing songs on his guitar, dreaming of one day having a garage band. David's no soldier. He's no macho man. He's not even in the army. The only reason he's at the battle site is his father wanted to check up on how his older brothers were doing in the battle. So his father sends him to the battle site under the guise of delivering the soldiers some cheese. What kind of cheese? Cheddar? Munster? Feta? Brie? Velveeta? The Bible does not say. The point that is being driven home in this story is that David is not much more than a high school pizza delivery boy. But while he's making his delivery, he hears gargantuan Goliath's taunts booming out across the valley, echoing in everyone's ears. Now, what else do we know about David? How has he been prepared for this moment? We know this, and you hear in the story that he's battled the bears and lions, or lions and tigers and bears, something like that in the story. But I think there's more that the story says, because you see, David had 7, count them, 7 older brothers. And those of you who have had the distinct honor of having any older brothers know what that means. What an older brother calls playing, a younger sibling calls crimes against humanity. Just picture Kevin in the movie Home Alone, right? While David brags about facing lions and tigers and bears, we know what really prepared him to battle against Goliath was that every day of his whole life he had had to deal with 7 older brothers. He did not know it, but David had been preparing for this Goliath moment his entire life. When David hears the taunts of this bigger, older bully, a little switch flips in David's head, and all those years of repressed rage find their destiny. And he says, "How dare you insult the armies of the living God?" While King Saul is shaking in his royal boots, David says, "Here I am, Lord, send me." Saul knows that nobody else is going to volunteer. He definitely does not want to step forward, so King Saul tries to put his own armor on little David. Maybe somebody will think that Saul was out there and at least trying, but cute little pink-cheeked David is wise. He knows that he is not King Saul. And when you are fighting a giant, you cannot pretend to be someone you are not. He goes on his own terms with his own shepherd's staff. Goliath steps out for battle. He's the Philistine version of shock and awe. He's got a suit of armor made of buffed bronze. So when he stands up there on the height, he shines like the noonday sun, and you can barely stand to look at him. He's got a big as a flagpole, bronze spear. He's got bronze shoes, bronze socks, bronze pants, bronze coat, bronze hat. He's even got bronze hair. Goliath is one color-coordinated giant. GQ Giant of the Year, best dressed and most terrifying. He knows how to intimidate an enemy. And while Goliath is preening out there before the two armies, David shouts, "Goliath, you've got a big mouth, and I'm going to close it once and for all. And after I'm finished with you, nobody's going to wear those silly bronze socks or that silly bronze hair for 1,000 years." And then Goliath, in his big, heavy, impenetrable armor, ponderously, slowly, unstoppably, step by step, lumbers forward. And he draws his giant sword and holds it high, expecting David to do exactly the same. But you see, David knows when you're fighting a giant, to draw a sword would be to do exactly what Goliath had done, which is to violate the number one rule of conflict management. The number one rule of conflict management: never let the Philistines set the terms of the battle. If you're going to fight a giant, don't do it on their terms. Fight with the gifts that God gives you. David is a shepherd. He had hours of time tending the sheep. When he was off there on his own, time to be there with his slingshot for target practice. So while gargantuan Goliath slowly lumbers towards him, cute little David runs straight at him, takes a perfectly imperfect stone out of his pouch, and before Goliath even had time to put down his coronavirus visor, toss, boom, bam, Goliath is down and the battle is over before most people even knew that it had started. Cute little David, by himself, had won the war. Now, why does the Bible include this story? It's because people of faith have always been tempted to live in Goliath's version of the story. You know, that might makes right, that bigger is better, the one with the most technology wins, he who hurls the best insults is the one who dominates. The people of faith have always been tempted to buy into the wrong story. God's been speaking to them, but they have not been listening. They were alive, but not alert. They'd bought into Goliath's narrative, and they'd started to confuse appearances with the truth. And the people of God have always stood up for the truth. This Goliath is one of many Goliaths that have appeared over history. The Goliaths of this world want to distract us with glitz and glitter, with pomp and shiny technology and buying up all the microphones. And if the church is to take on the Goliaths of our day, we need to stand for the truth, not appearances. That's why David aims his stone where he does. He aims high and hits Goliath between the eyes. And Goliath's mind is the first thing to go. His head had been filled with arrogance. His ideas had been blocking the vision of what is real, and now that head is gone. Now, some people may ask about the story of David and Goliath and say, did that really happen? To which I would respond, that's really the wrong question. The far more interesting question is, how many times has that happened? Alexander the Great defeated by one little kidney stone. Napoleon met his Waterloo in one unexpected muddy ditch. The Battle of Bannockburn, where the English swords and heavy armor drowned over a bunch of hungry Scots and their pointy sticks. George Washington and his ragtag farm boy army defeat the professional Hessians at the Battle of Trenton. Audie Murphy, don't even get me started about Audie Murphy, and then Rosa Parks rose up by sitting down. Time and time again, we have the story of David and Goliath. Is that story true? It is true every time some person of faith decides that it's time to stand up to some well-dressed, high-finance, seemingly all-powerful Goliath. This story is true every time some person of faith remembers that an army of one with God on their side constitutes an overwhelming force. So let Goliath be for us a symbol for everything that is fierce, intimidating, and frightening. Whatever makes you feel small and weak and vulnerable, whatever threatens to immobilize you, the disease that threatens you, the surgery that makes you afraid, the looming unemployment that is coming your way, one rejection after another, the loss of someone dear to you, fear of the future, fear of failure, fear of risk. Let Goliath be that fear, and the final fear, the power of death itself. But then remember this story of David and Goliath. As John Buchanan says, remember our story. The giants we face in our lives are not as powerful or impregnable as we have been led to believe. And yes, we really do face formidable challenges in our jobs, our relationships, our nation. And yet David did not run away from the giant. He ran toward the giant because faith in God gave him this power. And that is our story. That David's spiritual DNA runs in our veins. The warning of this story is when the Goliaths of this world tell their story and their story ends up in our heads, then people end up servile and afraid and in cages. But when we see through the eyes not of fear but of faith, then we have this story as our story. Like David, we have resources. David was just a simple shepherd with a few simple tools and some unconventional thinking and his faith. Think of all the resources that we have at our disposal. Those, along with our unconventional thinking and our faith, will grant us unfathomable power. God works through people who run straight at the problems of life, because we know that what may appear to be pebbles on the other side are the slung stones that can have a miraculous effect. And we have the stones of hope, of love, of courage, of forgiveness, of grace, of gratitude and goodness and generosity and kindness and compassion and sacrifice. And on this 4th of July weekend, it's important to remember that tiny stone that comes with the power of our democracy, the power to vote. When God is on our side, there are more resources at our command than any Goliath can even perceive. As the spiritual heirs of David, we know that nothing is impossible for us, provided we run toward our problems instead of running away. David has a message for us. Do not be afraid. David and Goliath remind us that a person should not be measured by the height of their stature, but by the height of their ideals. They should not be measured by the color of their army or the color of their skin, but by the content of their character and the faithful courage that leads them to aim high. And if Goliath reminds us of one thing, it is that old saying really is true. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. All we have to do is fight the good fight. With theological resources bestowed upon us in our faith and our faith in God, we have that courage to run straight at those problems. So remember this story and gather those stones. Remember, and when you lean back to throw, aim high. Aim high and let it fly, because victory is not far off. In fact, victory is just a stone's throw away.
Thanks for watching our video. Make sure to subscribe to get the latest and greatest videos from the Old Stone Church. And if you feel blessed by our message, please go to theoldstonechurch.org and click Donate. God bless you today and forever. The Old Stone Church. We've been loving Christ and serving City since 1820.